Hey guys, what's going on? Today we're going to talk about some bass fishing theory. Specifically, we're going to call it the big bass business. And what we're going to talk about in this video is just some kind of observations that I've made that can kind of just get applied to any body of water that you're fishing on. And that's kind of going to be the first thing we're going to focus on is what body of water you're fishing and what that kind of means when it comes to using some of these concepts and applying some of these ideas. And we'll take a quick look at Folsom Lake first, just because that's kind of my true home body of water. And some things to consider when you're looking at wherever it is that you're fishing is you have to think about the population of bass that you're targeting, and obviously what types of bass, largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth bass, kind of what you're dealing with in your body of water, access to forage, fishing pressure, different things like that. And the reason all that's important is because you're going to have to determine what is a big bass in your body of water. And in my personal opinion, I'd say any fish over 5 pounds is an awesome fish. I mean, that's definitely, like, depending on what lake you're in, I mean, that's probably a little bit of an older fish. That's a big bass. They do what they want. I think that's kind of right around the size where they start to act a little bit different and maybe some of their behaviors. And it's all relative though, right? So, I mean, you go to a place like Clear Lake, maybe a 5 pound bass isn't really that big of a deal. But then you go to a place like Folsom Lake and a 5 pounder is a really awesome fish. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people that have never even caught a 5 pound bass from Folsom Lake and other bodies of water that maybe it's a little bit more difficult to catch those type of fish. And the reason I bring that up, right, is once you determine in your head what you think is your big bass, which, kind of circling back to what I'm talking about, for Folsom, I'd say if you're catching a 4 pounder, I think that's pretty sweet. I mean, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's an awesome fish. Like, that thing's probably not going to leave your bag if you're putting together a 5 fish limit on Folsom Lake. Maybe it is if you're having a really awesome day, but I'd say a lot of the times you catch a 4, I mean, who knows, that might even be your kicker for the day on Folsom. So that's kind of what I think about Folsom Lake, probably 4 pound fish. That's an awesome fish. Anything above that is just even better. So now we're going to kind of go into what that means for you once you have that information established, right? So you're fishing a pond, maybe a 3 pounder is big. Maybe you're fishing Clear Lake. You're looking for something over 8. All of those are factors that you're gonna consider. So now we're kind of looking at location and what does that mean? So obviously, something that's been told to me that I've always found to be kind of true in a lot of ways is that 90% of the fish are in 10% of the lake, right? So there's going to be fish scattered all over the place, right? But when it actually comes to the true majority of the population, the spots that do have a lot of fish, a lot of bigger fish, it's going to be a very small percentage of the lake. And the reason for that is because as those fish start to grow, they're really looking for the prime area, the prime spot. They don't have to settle, and that's part of the reason that they've gotten so big. They haven't been eaten, they haven't been killed, they haven't been whatever's happened to them, right? They've made it this far. They obviously understand what's going on in terms of that, right? So as far as finding the prime locations, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. The first way, which is kind of I wouldn't say the easiest way, but just the most mindless way, is just when you catch a big bass, which you'll determine that on your body of water, right? You're going to need to make a note of that. And how can you do that? You can take a photograph of the fish to keep in your camera roll. Something that I do. I don't really do it on Folsom as much just because it's not as vast, so I have a pretty good memory of like what and where is going on. But for a place like the Delta, I actually have a map in my room, and every single time I catch a fish over 4 pounds, I put a pin on my map, or I put like a Sharpie in like the weight or whatnot, right? So I look over at this map to my right side, and I look around, and I have little pins. We'll we'll just like circle over here to the delta real quick. I have little pins all over the place, right? Different points of the delta. Oh, I caught one here. I caught one here. I caught one over here. I caught one over here, right? And what you're going to find, and what I have found up to this point, is that you're going to start realizing that, hey, for some reason, there's a lot of pins in this particular area. And it could be something as simple as like, oh, I always catch fish on this one exact dock. You have a bunch of pins on that dock. And then that could definitely be the case. But what I found more is it's like, hey, this slough that I'm fishing, I've caught a lot of fish over 4 pounds. Maybe I should fish there more. Maybe I should spend some more time finding the spot on the spot. And if you look at my map, what you're really going to see is a lot of pins above this area, because I primarily fished north for like 2 years. So that's a lot of the reason that those pins are up there. But even with a smaller area like this, you're going to find that most of the pins are in a very small area, and most of the pins are very close to each other. And that kind of ties back into what I'm saying, to bring it all kind of back together, is when it comes to finding this location, it can be as simple as you catch a big fish and you log it. And one of the difficulties with that, obviously, is catching the big fish. If you're not catching big fish by chance or just in general, and you're kind of frustrated, maybe that's why you're watching this video in the first place, that can be hard to document that, because you're like, hey, I haven't even had that experience yet, so how am I supposed to document it? So the other way that I would suggest, and this is a way that it's going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more paying attention, but it's still a very valid method, is the types of baits that you're throwing and how that can show you fish. It's no secret, especially nowadays with swim bait fishing and throwing really, really large baits, which in my opinion is anything over 7 inches, preferably something over 9, 10, 11 inch range baits. You're going to get a lot of followers. And for some people, that's all that ever happens, right? They throw swim baits. They're like, hey, these things don't work. I just have fish follow my baits. They never actually eat them. This is a waste of time, right? Well, what I can tell you, especially on Folsom Lake, where most of my experiences is Folsom and the Delta, over time you start to realize, hey, I've seen it, and it's all a visual estimate, right? But I've seen X amount of fish over 6 pounds on this point, this particular area on Folsom, with throwing a swim bait, right? And maybe if you decide like, hey, you know what, I'm not really a swim baiter, I don't really understand how this works. I can throw one, I can reel it in, I can do the whole deal, but I can't really get them to bite. Maybe you use that bait as a way to locate fish. In a really easy way to apply this would be, hey, let's see if we can get a real quick a little bit. Try and find a image where we actually have some like full water on the lake. I don't know why. This place is always in a drought, so it's a little hard to find the picture I want. There's got to be one where it's full. All right, I don't know why I can't find the right picture right now, but let's just say we're in an area that has a lot of trees. We'll just go over by the swim beach. So there's a lot of trees right here. Let's say you come through here, you throw a big 10-inch glide bait, you pull a couple 6-7 pounders off the trees, and they don't eat your bait, but now you saw the exact tree that they came off of. Now you can kind of go back through there with some techniques that you're a little bit more savvy with, maybe like a topwater bait, a wacky rig Senko is a great option, a jig, something where for you, you're a little more comfortable with getting that fish to bite. So you don't have to be a swim bait fisherman. You just have to be someone that is willing to be observant, right, and see what you want to see. And you don't even have to throw swim baits, especially in the springtime. There are times where you just might legitimately see a big fish for no reason other than it just happened to show itself in your presence, right? And you need to keep a note of that, because especially on Folsom Lake, the Delta is kind of a different animal, just in the sense of because it's always changing so much. A lot of those fish are moving a lot more. Folsom can kind of have the same effect just with the water fluctuations, but I will tell you that I'd say I have about like 4 or 5 points on Folsom Lake where I consistently see like really big bass, like 8 pounds plus, like giant fish for Folsom and for a lot of places. I think anything over an eight's pretty awesome. There's a lot of places in the country where they don't even get fish that big. So with that in mind, with those spots, especially like for a person like me where I'm fishing 4 or 5 6 days a month, it just depends. And then I'm definitely not a professional bass fisherman or anything like that. So there was a particular point on Folsom where it took me 2 years of fishing that point to finally catch one off of it. And when I did, it was almost a 9 pounder. I think it was 879. And it was one of those things where it was so satisfying because I saw those fish year after year after year, and I just never could catch one. And then finally, the stars aligned, right? Low light, perfect wind, time of year, presentation cast, everything came in, and it finally tricked that fish. And that's one of those things when we'll kind of switch over to techniques now a little bit. Everything has to go right when it comes to catching a big fish for your body of water, especially when it comes to catching a giant fish in your body of water. They didn't get that big from being dumb. And I know a lot of people say stuff like that, but there's a lot of truth to it. I don't think that bass are smart at all, but I do think that they're a master of their environment, and they understand the world that they live in enough to survive. And that can be as simple as just picking up on subtle cues that something isn't right. I don't think a bass looks at your spinnerbait coming through the water column and says, oh, he's throwing 20-pound test, I'm not going to eat it. But if he was throwing 12, I would. The only reason that applies is because it's more of a subtlety that's either turning the fish on or turning the fish off. And you have baits like A-rigs where there's all these wires, they eat them anyway, right? Spinnerbait, different things where they're kind of ridiculous and the fish are still eating the bait. And that's where it comes down to like your technique, your presentation, and what you're doing, and how you're gonna optimize it the best you can in order to get those big bites. So for a lot of these swim baits, right, I think it's mostly condition related. I don't really change the presentation of my bait in the sense of like my rod, my reel, my line, my hooks pretty much stay the same. And I'm sure subtle changes in those could make a difference, but for the most part, my setup stays the same. What I'm mostly looking for is conditions. That's really the thing that is going to change it. And in my personal experience, there has been a direct correlation between bad weather and me catching big fish. And I know maybe you listen to Butch Brown, maybe you listen to some of these other swim bait fishermen, guys talk about, oh, I love when it's super sunny and the big Floridas come out and yada, yada, yada. In my personal experience, which I haven't caught even near as many giant bass as they have, I've noticed that, especially on Folsom, they seem to like weather, whether that be wind, rain, overcast skies, a combination of all those things. And I think the more factors that you begin to stack in your favor, the higher opportunity chance that you have of actually catching that fish as those stars need to align as we've kind of been talking about. So for an example, right, you're fishing the Maine Peninsula, it's overcast, it's windy, it's raining, your boat's, gliding into the spot, you're not using the trolling motor, maybe you turned off your graphs, like who knows, right? You're throwing your big swim bait out, like all of those are going to help that bass believe that your bait is the real deal. And that's really what it comes down to, is you just need them to make a mistake, and it just needs to be a big enough mistake to where you're going to hook them, because there's a lot of bass that make mistakes and they don't get caught. And I think that's what might even make them smarter in some regards, right? They come up, they whack your swim bait, they don't get hooked, and now they're like, I'm gonna remember that. And maybe they don't, but I think that's the thing, especially if you sting them. If they come up and whack your bait and your hook grabs them a little bit and they come off, I don't think they like that. I think if you have one come up and boil on it, they get out unscathed, I think they'll come back and bite it maybe in an hour or so. But definitely not if you sting them. If you sting them, they're probably gonna be pretty butthurt about it. And I don't know where they go. I don't know if they go pout on the side and then don't eat for a day, or maybe they just swim away. But I've definitely noticed that with stinging them. And yeah, so we talked about location, we talked about techniques, we talked about some of the timing and understanding some of the opportunity. And one of the last things I really want to touch on, and I've seen this on Folsom a lot, and I've seen it on the Delta too. I think finding it on the Delta is a little bit more difficult, just due to the fact that the water clarity and the depth doesn't always present itself in a way for this to actually happen. But I'm sure people can attest to this, and they have seen it. And what I'm going to talk about is kind of the loner theory versus the pack theory when it comes to big bass. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of like smallmouth fishing experience. I think that in the state you can catch big smallmouth. There's lakes that have smallmouth, but when it actually comes to like primarily fishing for them, it's not really as available, versus like spotted bass and largemouth are a lot more of a thing. And anyway, what I want to touch on is when you're considering a spot, we'll go back to like this area with these trees that I've talked about in other videos, right? You might have a tree that has a hole on it, and there's a 6-pound bass sitting in there. And that 6-pound bass owns that hole. It's its area. Nobody else is gonna say anything about it, because that fish is big, and it's gonna wreck you if you come into its spot, if you're a bluegill or a carp or some other fish, right? And then we'll zoom out really quick, shoot back over to Folsom, and we'll talk about the same thing. Maybe there's a point that a fish is sitting on, and on that point there's a specific stump or a rock pile, and that fish owns that spot. Nobody else is there. That's kind of that loner theory. And I really believe that fish probably associates to that area. And depending on the time of year, that fish might slide up. It might slide down the point. When it's time to spawn, it might move into one of these coves and then come back out and then hop in here. You never really fully know what exactly the deal with that is. All right, sorry, I just paused this for a second. Hopefully nothing changed with the audio. But anyway, so yeah, that fish comes back into this pocket, comes out of that point, and it kind of just associates to that general area. So that fish that I caught earlier in the year, this year, that was 9 pounds, like 902 or something, on a swim bait. That I actually had someone DM me. Can't remember if it was on Instagram or somewhere else, but he actually caught that fish like 4 months before I did. And I really didn't believe him at first, to be completely honest, but when he showed me the pictures, I was like, I don't know, that looks like it could definitely be the same fish. It had some pretty distinct markings on the side of it, and some of its fins were a little weird, and I was like, I don't know, I think that's the same one. But the point of bringing that up is that fish was living in a specific area like we just talked about, right? And it was only probably a couple 100 yards from where I caught it. And it was doing a different deal for a different time of year. When I caught it, it was staging on a point, getting ready to move into a cove to spawn. And when he caught it, it was just sitting on a rock pile in the middle of winter, waiting to do that exact thing. So that's pretty interesting, especially when you start to catch some of these fish. I think that, who knows, maybe you'll catch the same one a couple years later. I know that Working Class Zero has a really cool video of him catching a fish, and I can't remember if he breaks it off or what happens, but he ends up catching the same one again, and it was like a year apart. Like, it was pretty significant amount of time, and that just shows you that fish, uses that spot. And especially in some of those SoCal lakes that have less water fluctuation, it's a lot easier for a fish to stay in the same area versus somewhere like Folsom, where it might come up 60, 70, 80 feet and change. So the last little part of this is going to be the group theory, the pack theory. And I've mostly noticed this throwing swim baits, but I'm sure you can see it other places. There are fish that group together for the sole purpose of hunting I think. And just like a normal pack of wolves, we'll use trout in this example instead of like a deer. Those big bass are going to corral the trout somewhere. So whether that's like a cove or onto a point somewhere or whatnot. And the way you'd kind of see this, right, is I've had bites on a swim bait before where I cast my glide bait out and I have one whack it, another one kind of like kiss it, and then all of a sudden a third fish comes up and just T-bones it, destroys it. And for whatever reason, it always happens to be the one that's a little bit smaller out of the group of fish. But that's definitely something I've noticed. And especially with some of the spotted bass populations, I've noticed that you'll find these crazy wolf packs of like 4, 5, 6 pound spots that are just almost like pelagic fish in the sense of just roaming the openness of the lake. And, before having live scope, and I really haven't had much experience to use my live at all, especially with all the lakes closing, I would just run into these fish by happenstance. It wasn't purposeful. It was just by mere chance. But you'd pull up to a point, you'd throw a swim bait out, a bunch of giant spots would be fighting over it, and then they would remain on that point for a period of time, whether it be a week, 2 weeks, or maybe only that day. But I think these packs of fish work together with that common goal of corralling bait fish, corralling trout, corralling something. And when it comes to finding those bigger fish, I think that I think all types of fish school. As far as bass like sizes go, I think small ones hang out together, big ones hang out together, and that also kind of comes back to that map deal we talked about earlier. That maybe you do find an area. We'll kind of shoot over here to the Delta. Maybe you do find a slough where there's a lot of big ones that are in it, but maybe you find a specific spot where you keep catching large fish. There's probably a chance that there's multiple big ones that just live there, and maybe they work together for a common goal. I know that there was one time, it was years ago, I haven't personally observed this, but I thought it was a really cool story, assuming there was some truth to it. I was talking to a dude at Wimpy's Marina, and it was real early in the year. I want to say it was like February. And I asked him, I was like, oh, how'd you do today? And he's like, oh, I only caught one fish, but it was a big one. I actually caught it on a Huddleston. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And he's like, yeah, I've actually never really thrown a Hud on the Delta before. And I was like, yeah, I haven't either. That's definitely kind of the last thing in my head to be throwing out here, especially with the grass and different stuff. And he said, the reason that I threw it was I was in the back of one of the sloughs nearby to here, and I actually found some steelhead smelt, or like smaller juvenile steelhead, floating around in the back of the slough. And I actually saw a bass eat one of them. And because my day had been so bad before this, I said, you know what? I guess that's what we're doing now. So he tied on a Huddleston. He started just winding it around in the back of the slough around these fish that he was seeing swim around, and he ended up sticking like an 8-pounder on the Hud in the Delta, which is pretty awesome. I think, assuming everything with that lines up, I think that's a pretty cool story. I think there's definitely some truth to it, and hopefully that's how it happened. But I'm sure that those steelhead ended up in the back there, probably from maybe some steelhead getting lost and spawning back there, but also due to bass keeping them back there, maybe corralling them in the back of one of these dead-end sloughs and just munching on them. I mean, you see that all the time with threadfin and other types of bait. The bass will corral them into a pocket, especially during the fall, and eat them. And I think a lot of these big bass do that also, just on a smaller scale. Maybe it's only 4, 5, 6 big bass, but they're 6, 7 pounds each, and they're corralling some golden shiners or some little baby stripers or whatever it is on the Delta. It doesn't always have to be trout. And that's where I bring up the point of I haven't seen that as much on the Delta, but a lot of it has to do with how clear is the water, how deep is it, for you to really be able to see it happen in front of you. I'm sure all over the Delta there's big bass that work together to get bluegill or get other fish on flats. We just don't see it because we're not able to really be above them due to the water depth. But I think we're going to kind of wrap it up there just to kind of circle it all back together. understanding your type of body of water, what's a big fish there, get some prime locations figured out on your lake, whether that be isolated cover or bigger things where you've found fish in the past, different techniques, and then some of that loner versus group theory, and trying to target those populations based on that, whether it's just a single fish on a spot you continuously see, or maybe it's a group of fish in an area feeding on trout or shiners or whatnot. But those are just some observations I've made. Hopefully, maybe that'll help some of you guys and kind of help you hone in some of your thinking. But I appreciate everybody's support. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.